Carlisle.
Great. Good evening. I'm going to gavel to order. This is the Morganton Planning and Zoning Commission. This is our February 13th meeting. First thing we're going to do this evening is take a look at old business. If you can take a look at your agendas for the folks on the commission. You'll note we approval of our previous minutes, if you had a chance to review those. And then item 2 is review of city council actions since last meeting. They met on September 9th, 2024, and...
You have to vote.
Oh, I have to vote on each one first. Okay,
Yes.
very good.
Okay.
All right. Does anyone have any questions or notes about the meeting minutes from August? None? Okay. Do I have a motion to adopt those?
So moved.
I have a motion. A second?
I'll second.
Great. Anyone in opposition to those? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. Approved. All right. Thank you. On to the second item. Second item for old business is review of the city council action since last meeting. The council met on September 9th, 2024. Ms. Smith stated city council approved the following items. Public hearing to consider adopting the Imagine 2040 land development plan.
So they did adopt unanimously the Imagine 2040 comprehensive plan, and we thank you all again very much for all of your commitment over the 18-month development process of that plan. We have been utilizing it, as you will see in our agenda tonight, and we have gotten some positive feedback about that as well. So, thank you.
Any comments or questions about that? Great. I have a motion to approve that.
No,
Or we
no,
don't have to
no,
move
we don't have
on?
a motion.
Okay, very good.
No, we're
Okay,
good.
very good. Excellent. Okay, our next thing we're just going to review is our disclosure of interest. So I'm just going to read that out loud. Any member of the commission who may have a conflict of interest or a possible conflict of interest regarding any item of business to be discussed at a commission meeting should declare that conflict of interest to enable the commission to manage the conflict and resolve it in accordance with the code that's stated there. This evening, we have just one item of new business. Does anyone have anything they need to share about that? Very good. Okay, moving right along. I just did want to welcome, we have 2 new members that are on the commission this evening. So we welcome back Louis, who was our previous member many moons ago, recently retired from the city and is now joining us again. So we're very pleased to have his experience.
Pleased to be here.
Very good. And we also are welcoming Greg Smith, who's here for his first meeting. So thank you guys for your service to this commission and being involved.
Look forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. All right. So our first new business is item 1, consideration of an application. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Consideration of an application submitted by, oh, actually, no, I didn't do the appearances. I had a moment to do that. Pardon me. Great.
Okay.
Before we get into new business, there's an agenda item we have reserved for any citizen, an opportunity to be here before the commission if there's anything they'd like to speak out that's not going to be covered this evening previously planned. You have a moment to do that. Anyone? Everyone's all set? In which case, we'll move on to the business of the evening. Very good. Consideration of an application submitted by Timothy L. Norman to rezone the property listed at 0 Eula Street. The property is currently zoned low-intensity district mobile home overlay, and the application is to rezone to medium-intensity district. And so I'm going to turn it over to Wendy to share with us about this item.
Okay. So, Chad, if you can bring this up on the screen. The property is located here, off of Kirksey Drive. If I'm going to use the little arrow, if you guys can see that, to kind of orient you a little bit, because the map got really busy with the aerial photos underneath and the hatching. This area here is the Burke County School Bus Garage. This area here is the site where they are currently constructing the Animal Services Center, and then a little further down is the Burke County 911 Center. Vulcan is across the street back in here, across Kirksey Drive. There is a developed residential neighborhood on the western side of the property boundary that is in LID. There is undeveloped land in MID, immediately adjacent to the eastern side of the property. And then there is other land developed in Zone CU for townhomes and single-family dwellings there in Henry's Glen that adjoins the property kind of down to this corner, and then other vacant land, also in Zone MID, just sort of to the southwest here of the property. The applicant is seeking to rezone this portion in LID that has a mobile home overlay to MID, which is the zone on the other side of the property, and to remove the mobile home overlay from that property. So that is kind of the gist of what they are asking with the application. One item to note about this particular property is the deed to the property. Hang on, I've got to find it here. Within the deed, there is a restriction that, there's two restrictions actually, and these restrictions, I did not write this, remain in effect for the lifetime of the last to die of the present residents of the homes on Dogwood Drive, plus 21 years. Okay? And that would have been
For us, anyway.
when this deed was completed in, let's find the date here, 2015, yes. Noting that that was on the deed before that, so you would probably expect that that continues on to maybe future deeds there. So these restrictions we're going to talk about apply for, I don't know who's keeping a record of the last to die of the people that lived there, but we'll figure it out. Point is, it's not going to happen in anybody's lifetime that's here at the meeting today. Okay. The restricted property shall not be used in any manner to give a right of ingress and egress from Smoke Rise Drive, which is the portion that directly borders sort of the northwestern part of the property, from Dogwood Drive, from Brooksea Street, or from Curtis Street. And there shall be no roads, parking lots, or other improvements made or constructed on the restricted property except for landscaping which is acceptable to the property owners funding on the west of Smokewood Drive across the street from those. And then the restricted property is a 30-foot buffer strip adjoining that last property on the bottom of Dogwood Drive and Smoke Rise Drive. So let's go back to the map here. So this property along in here and this property here at the end of Dogwood Drive. So that the 30 feet along through there is where you can't build anything and is restricted and all of that. And then you can't have access from Smoke Rise, from Dogwood, from Brooksea, or over here from Curtis Street.
How do you get there?
So, great question. This portion over here is actually a 40-foot wide right-of-way out to Kirksey Drive. That is already city right-of-way owned. There is no road constructed in it, but there is unfortunately, Burke GIS is down today. So I will attempt to show you this on our map, but I have to turn off all the other layers. So hang on just a second. Map layers. Let's turn off all the layers. Well, not all the layers. Hang on. I need the parcels. Close. Okay. Actually, it's easier to see there. That little strip there that doesn't have a color on it, doesn't have a color on it because it's road reserve. So it's not zoned for property. So there is a road reserve that goes into, and then this property here that's highlighted is the subject property. So you would access it that way. I do note that Mr. Norman owns this property as well as the properties in Zone MID to the east of the property. So there may be access opportunities over to there, which actually extends to a little bit further. These properties here that border East Union Street. They're in the same property ownership. Clearly, there's no road or anything in there, but does potentially give a few more development opportunities than would be if in other ranges of different property ownership of that. So basically, they're asking to make this green color the same as the yellow color over here, but to remove that mobile home overlay. Let's turn all the other ones off Would. Yay. So to remove that mobile home overlay, which does not have down in here as well. So access would be of interest for later. As I said, we'll address that. They'd address that at the time of development as to what that would be. I do note both Kirksey and, since I mentioned East Union, are both North Carolina DOT roads, and any type of access onto there would be subject to them, though we would expect both of them to have capacity for whatever type of development might be allowed there that is in that MID zone. They have access to our public water system. They have access to sewer. There's actually a sewer line running roughly along this creek line through here from Brookside there. So, and would have access to city electric that is just being hooked up to the Animal Services Center that is going to there at the moment. In your packet, there is permitted uses comparison. Going from LID to MID allows by right for a compliant application any of the uses in zone MID. And if there is anything that's in LID that's not permitted in MID, which I'm not sure that there is, there should be a couple of random ones there that, well, I don't know if there's anything permitted in LID that you couldn't also do in MID.
Livestock.
Livestock, yes, sorry, the very first ones with the, that's as a principal use or a greenhouse, a nursery itself. So you can do any of those things while you're, well, the applicant, which I believe Alan is representing tonight, may, you can ask the applicant what they intend to do with the site, if anything, but that is actually not necessarily relevant to your decision because they could do any of these things. We'd just like to emphasize that. They could do any of those things. If you give them the power to do that, you would need to judge the likelihood of, for example, somebody wanting to develop, I don't know, let me pick one here, a pawn shop in the middle of that place, you know? Does that sound like, that would be probably a use for that site. There are also then in the next table, too, the comparison of the densities. Their base density is the same of those. If the development were to utilize performance standard points, they would be able to have a little bit more density in the MID than in the LID, so from 6 dwelling units per acre to 10 dwelling units per acre. However, to earn that much density, you have to earn more performance standard points, which the colloquial understanding of that is you have to give us more nice things. So you have to give us more landscaping. You have to give us more infrastructure points with sidewalks and decorative street lighting or EV chargers, whatever the selection of that is, and more building design elements on there than you would have to otherwise. So typically, for example, if a house was built on there, I wouldn't be able to tell you under state law what that house looks like. But if they were to choose to develop it utilizing performance standard points, there's a series of items they'd have to meet for design of that house that are generally recognized as positive and well-developed design features above and beyond what would be required for just normal development there. So, and of course, the same thing for non-residential density if they wanted to develop. An important thing to note for both LID and MID is that if they develop non-residential things in that district, then they already have to do those performance standard things with the nicer building design elements in it than would be typically required otherwise. The comprehensive plan that we've talked about a couple of times tonight, so the area we're talking about, this loop here is the end of the drive on Henry's Glen, and then this little tiny road right here is that access out to Kirksey, so the property is sitting in here, and that is in the mixed density residential neighborhood, which is the highest density of neighborhood development in there, residential type development. So it allows for smaller neighborhood scale type commercial uses, which is similar to the MID zone, which would cap a residential use, a retail use at 3,000 square feet. So not large-scale type development. We're not looking at a Walmart or even like a regular-sized Dollar General type thing in there. It would be smaller type resale if they were to be able to develop that. That's still kind of the expectation for that mixed-density residential neighborhood, if there was any non-residential development. But in residential development, we would be expected this entire area in here to be able to go to smaller lot sizes to develop, whether it's townhomes or condos or smaller lot, single-family residential development, or even larger lot, single-family development would still be allowed in there. So a whole range of those uses. So it would be consistent both with what they're proposing to change into to the MID and also to what anyone in the surrounding area would be able to ask for if they were to be asking to rezone as well on those pieces. And yeah, they are going to keep the airport heliport safety overlay. They're not proposing to make any changes to that, nor to the watershed protection overlay as part of this. So it would still be consistent with the current zoning in those two places. Are there any questions? Anything that I've maybe not been clear on, or that you have a?
Have you heard from any of the neighbors of the
I think
residential?
there's a couple of neighbors here. I have spoken to one neighbor and explained, and I know Jackie has spoken to one and explained the things that we've talked about here, about those restrictions and things. So after we have questions for me, and then after I think Alan gets a chance to speak here representing the landowner, then they'll be able to speak to us as well. But we have had a couple of calls, as is typical with any rezoning ordinance, when people see the signs or get the notice, and have an opportunity to explain the application to them, but would welcome any questions that they have here that haven't been addressed otherwise as well.
Can I ask, under the current zoning classification, what is just the sheer number, density-wise, at that zoning classification? Then we jump up to MID, what's the maximum
question.
total number?
So this is 28 point something 20 acres, 20.64 acres. So currently, they would be able, just under base zoning, to do 41 units of residential development. Under, I'm gonna drop the 0.6 and say under the performance standard zoning, 6 times 20, so whatever
Could be a
that is.
120.
100, thank you. It's been a long week, people. And the difference in the maximum for the other would be 200. Now, if I can show you one more thing on this map here, if we can go back to the,
No, I know, 'cause-
let's see. This is the contours on the site. So if you guys are familiar with elevation contours, the closer lines are together, the steeper it is. So there is quite a bit of slope on some portions of this that may dictate development. That is perhaps a little bit different to some of the other surrounding neighborhood that would need to be taken into account regardless of what is developed on the site.
It's also the creek.
And there is, that line between the two properties is a creek basin down there. There are, in the watershed ordinance, 100-foot buffers required from the creek. There are some limiting provisions where you can potentially ask to construct some retaining items and things in that buffer, but ideally, but any type of actual development would need to be 100 feet off that creek, 30 feet off of smoke rise. It's constraining what you can do on the site, as those restrictions do on any site throughout the city.
And that overlay will remain.
Yes, all of those details would still be there with the watershed, retention of the watershed protection ordinance, or watershed protection ordinance overlay on the site, so yes.
And with the density changes going up a little bit, do you anticipate any kind of transportation issue?
I do not, because Kirksey Drive is such a large road and has so much capacity at the moment already that we just don't touch on a typical basis. That I would not hesitate to say that that road could not handle 10,000 more cars a day and not be, or probably very likely more, and not be an issue there. As far as what DOT may require, if there were 300 homes on this parcel, not 300, we say couldn't do 300, 200, at the intersection there with Cosby Quarry Road would be a matter for DOT. But that is also, I think, one of the advantages at the moment where, while as a planner, you may typically want it to connect to these other streets, to be able to disperse that traffic. As we've heard, that is a deed restriction at the moment. So presumably you would need everybody along Dogwood and Smoke Rise and all those people that we have to wait to die, to agree to get out of this otherwise, right? To agree to release them from that clause. But that you also potentially, if it was developed as a whole, even if it wasn't developed as a whole, you could get over to potentially Brookside if a road was connected through there. And, like I said, over to East Union, there is, some options for that as well. And both of those could also take extra capacity, so, great questions.
And if folks were to maximize the density through the performance-based code, that density doesn't have to be evenly distributed across the property. It's just across, how does that, there's not a rule about that per se?
That's correct in some terminology, except they would need a minimum area for each house. Realistically, I mean, I suppose what you're maybe asking is, could we do a whole bunch of apartments down here and then like 3 or 4 acre lots back here? Yes, as a subdivision as a whole, like you could, you potentially could do that. Again, I think there, in this particular case, there are probably some site factors that would perhaps dictate that. I do point out that if they are doing individual lots, so townhomes, rather than condos or apartments on that, you do still have that 25-foot minimum lot width, which we've been told recently is actually wide these days for a condo, for a townhome on there, but it does dictate a certain decent-sized lot that they would need for that type of development there. And if it was detached homes, then they've got that 50-foot minimum.
Got it. Okay.
For those. Anytime in our zoning ordinance that you go 50 feet or below on your lot size, you're required to have alley-loaded lots and not have your driveways off of that, so you wouldn't get a development where you see all these homes and then, every few feet there's driveways there. You would have homes facing the street with sidewalks and things there, and then parking around behind that as well, so.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I've got a question. What about traffic control at Kirksey and Union?
So as I said, that'd be a matter for DOT,
So that's
depending upon what
state.
was developed
Okay.
there. And DOT would assess that at the time of development rather than at the time of rezoning. But our expectation at the moment is that that could be managed
Okay.
regardless of what that is.
Could be managed with the existing one stop sign?
It would be if there were, if there were significant improvements to be made,
Right.
then that would be at the cost of the developer
Okay.
at the time of development.
Right.
So let's say we took this entire, and I want to be very clear. I'm not doing math at this time. I'm completely making up numbers at the moment. But say you took this entire undeveloped area, including the area that Mr. Norman doesn't own, the area that's undeveloped in Henry's Glen, this area back here that the county owns, and you developed 1,000 homes on there, you might need a stoplight at that intersection, but then the people developing that would be
Would be-
required to
okay,
do
okay.
that
Well, as long as
at that time. But we don't have a stoplight at Amherst and Kirksey either, so,
Right.
maybe not.
And to be clear, there's nothing there now. There's a right-of-way, but there is no street there
There's no
on
street,
this
there's no
side of
road.
Kirksey Drive. The
And
Cosby Quarry
DOT
Road's on the other side.
We'll look at that and how that would be one of the considerations at the time of development, is how that roadway in its location interacts with Cosby Road, whether it's better to have them tee in, whether it's better to offset them, and maybe, the county's not using this little piece here. do some kind of a swap there. I don't know, that's something that DOT will discuss at the time of development. But to be pretty clear, any of those it is our expectation and our professional advice as planners that any of those uses that are listed there and any combination of development of them would be able to be addressed, because you could always have a signalized intersection at that location that should be able to handle any traffic if it was needed to do so. I also want to be really clear for anybody in the public that may be watching or listening to this at home, we are not saying there's going to be a signal at Cosby and Horry Road and Kirksey Drive at this time, or at any time in the nearby foreseeable future for that development. I think that there's very likely this could be developed for homes without additional controls there. Again, looking at, we don't have that at Amherst and Kirksey
Right.
at the moment.
Right.
And that, or at Amherst and Vinarden, there's just stop signs.
Right. Well, my
on
concern
both
would
of
be
those,
the
but yes.
excessive, not excessive, but the additional
The additional
traffic
traffic, yes.
at Union and, because I go there all the time to see my daughter, so I know the traffic
Right.
situation there, you know, and that is, it could be exacerbated by additional.
Exactly, and those would be things that, if DOT has a significant change in use,
Right.
and again, just to be clear, I mentioned that only because the same owner owns all of these, but, going out to Union, but if there is any significant, change in use and significant, traffic impact, DOT will require the developer to conduct a traffic impact assessment, and that will include recommendations for improvements. As a, local example, if anyone's familiar with the new Sheets development and things up, and the apartments that are going on near those, you'll notice that intersection has changed over the last couple of years, and that's as a result of the traffic impact assessments that had to be completed for that project, and that developer was responsible for cost putting in. We did have some very, very minor amount of sidewalk in lieu fee money that we used for the crosswalks on that intersection, but they will have to do those studies, and you gotta do what DOT tells you,
Right. Okay.
which, whether we all agree with it or not. On that. Good, great questions about that.
Can I ask a question? It doesn't appear there's any manufactured homes in the, obviously it's an empty parcel. Is that just a sort of a leftover overlay,
lot
or
of
what
the-
was that a?
I'm not in, I might have to turn to Louis here, may have more expertise about why the mobile home overlays were chosen in the locations that they were, but
Well, it's
on this
because where your
property-
cursor is, there's an
Yeah,
enormous
there is a mobile home park
development.
there.
Okay.
But as I said, you can currently develop mobile homes on Long Dogwood if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
I know that when the 2015 zoning ordinance went in, there were initially some mobile home restrictions as part of that zoning ordinance that were removed right before it was adopted.
Mm.
And there was ongoing conversation over the course of a year. And Hank, I could ask you, I don't know who all else was on the zoning committee there, but I know Hank
We attempted to
was.
do a study, and that was like going up against a hurricane. And that the owners, the manufactured home owners wouldn't have a bit of what we were proposing at the time. But maybe down the road,
So in 2016, we did add in some restrictions.
yeah. But not as
if I can-
effectively what we would have loved to have done.
Try to summarize these, and maybe Jackie can yell at me if I get these wrong. In a mobile home overlay, you were allowed to put it's actually manufactured home overlay. You were allowed to put a manufactured home, which would be, again, colloquially think of as a single wide trailer. Manufactured homes have to be built after or
74,
pre-1994?
74,
90,
So
90, no, it's 90-something.
90, there's a
Doesn't
rule about
matter.
when they have to be built or not built. And we are talking about again, what you think of as a single-wide trailer. Double-wide homes and modular homes can be built anywhere in the, not double wides. Double wides cannot be built anywhere in the city, but modular homes can be built anywhere in the city. And you would often be hard pressed to tell the difference on the ground between a modular home and a double wide. But there are certain HUD rules that you have to build to make it a modular home rather than a double wide on there. So, if you can kind of picture those two different types of development, the single wide trailer is what they are saying they would no longer be building on that site. But modular homes could still be built there, could still be built in Dogwood and other areas, probably not Henry's Glen because they have other restrictions. But there is a mobile home park there, again, well, my cursor's not on the screen, but just behind the 911 center, that is there.
Is part of this application involving any recombination of this property into the parcel that he already owns?
It is not at this time, no.
Okay.
That's what I was gonna ask too.
But it would make them consistent with each other, except for the mobile home overlay that is currently remaining over the other properties. And if I can pop, Chad, can you put my screen back up? I'm gonna try to turn some different layers off, so I'm gonna turn off the contours. And I'm actually going to see if I can turn off the base district. And turn this other one back on. No, not that one. This one. So all of that is mobile home overlay, but when you get closer to East Union over here, you do lose that overlay along the East Union frontage and back in Brookside Lane and so forth. And also up, obviously, where the non-residential uses are. So if, again, we're talking about the entirety of the parcels that Mr. Norman owns, some of them have a mobile home overlay and some of them do not already. Great. Other questions?
Yeah, the question that Judy asked, whether the parcels have been joined or not. What's the difference if they're all zoned the same? What's the difference if they've been, what was the term you used, Judy?
Recombined.
If they've been recombined, then instead of having one single 20-acre parcel and one 40-some acre parcel, and then however much this one is, 7 or so, they're just one larger parcel.
Does that have to be done?
None of it has to be done. She was just wondering if it was going to be done, I think.
If it's going to be a large development that will incorporate multiple tracks, it's typical to recombine it all into one parcel for development review and taxes and everything else.
We could review it all together if, depending upon what any developer would be proposing, they could leave them separate of that. But if there are individual lots to be developed, ultimately, that's all gonna be chopped back up into individual home lots or individual commercial development lots of some sort, unless you're going to have, which is not allowed in MID, a ginormous development like Walmart or something, you have very little use for a large parcel of that size altogether, unless you're looking at park space or you're looking at a really large development. And again, that really large development is not allowed in this zone. So that's a good point, I think, to make. Or not allowed in the, well, it's not allowed in the existing zone or the proposed zone that it's going to.
Any other questions from the commission? Okay, then I'm gaveling. Okay. Then I am gaveling for public comment. So I'm going to open that up. So if
And
there's
let the applicant,
yeah, if the applicant has a comment and would like to share,
or the applicant's representative,
thank
I
you.
guess.
If you could introduce yourself,
Okay,
please.
my name is Alan Curtis. I am the broker that is representing Mr. Norman in this application, and he regrets that he's not able to be here, but he is probably in Japan at this point. So they had to leave a day early for some reason, I don't know why. So speak on his behalf. Obviously, he is a proponent of this change and to bring his parcels there together to make it more advantageous to market it to a developer. When developers look at raw pieces of land, they look at what the density could be and what they're able to put there and get out of it. And obviously, increasing the density is one of the most important things for them, because the cost of development and the more units that they are able to put within a parcel of land, it means they're able to actually make it happen, rather than moving on to somewhere else that they're not, since they can't make it happen. So definitely a proponent of increasing the density there to match the other parcels that Mr. Norman owns and to make it more marketable. Any questions for me?
I don't have a question for him, but I do have something that I forgot to say, if you guys will allow me to do so.
Yeah.
When I mentioned the performance standard points and the items that you had to do, the nice things to earn those points, I mentioned landscaping and infrastructure requirements and building design requirements. What I failed to mention was the category for open space requirements, that there are minimum open space requirements that you have to develop. And you get more performance standard points that allows you to increase your density if you provide more open space for the site. So if you had a 6 or 7 lot development, you're probably going to pay an in lieu fee to the city because you're going to come out at like 2 or 3 grand or something for that. For parcels of this size, and if you were looking at residential development, the amount of stuff that you have, there would be an expectation of open space that would be provided. And again, you get more points with the amount of open space that is provided. And there are certain requirements about usability of open space as well. It's not your, it cannot just be all your leftover bits or your stormwater drainage retention
So
ponds.
the highest slope, this thing has a real high slope in that area there. If that, could that be considered open space?
I'm going to refer you guys to section 4.5 of the zoning ordinance. There's about 10 different options for open space in there, and each one of them includes requirements to meet that option. So for example, to be a passive recreation open space, there's different requirements than if you're being an active recreation open space. The difference in those two being generally in an active space, you need room enough and width enough for a kid to kick a ball around, all of those kind of spaces. Whereas passive might be more trails and wooded areas
Trails would
and
work
things.
in
There's a section for adopted greenway trails. There's a section where, yes, you can use a limited amount of that for your stormwater drainage features. But you may want a pond at certain points for that. Playgrounds are an option, as are, again, just wooded open space. So, but there are specific requirements set in the zoning ordinance for whatever type of space you choose.
Okay.
Kind of those width requirements, how it's able to be used, and to make sure it is somewhat usable for those types of space. So, forgive me, I didn't mean to interrupt Alan, but as he talked about density, it triggered that I had not mentioned that other performance standard requirement there. So, anyway, continue.
That's it, unless you have questions.
Yeah, and do you, as a broker, do you have already active inquiries
Yes,
for development there?
yes, we do.
Good. Help to fill a need for this city.
We hope.
Any questions? I don't think we have any other questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, and if there's any other public questions or comments, you're welcome to,
Or against.
or against, yes, or just, please, if you don't mind, coming just,
Name and address.
if you can just introduce yourself.
Judith Ford. I actually live on Dogwood.
Great.
I just have a question with, I'm sorry, what? Ford.
Forward.
In removing the mobile home overlay, does that mean like trailers cannot?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I guess my big concern, I've lived there for almost 20 years now, right? Where the area they're talking about developing, right? We have so much nature out there. Like, it's just this little pocket of a nature retreat in the middle of the city. I mean, I love the fact that I'm like 1.5 miles from the center of the city, but we have birds, we have cranes, we have hawks, we have foxes out there, we have everything. And if you overdevelop that area, all of that is gonna go away. We have a pond behind our house that is naturally fed from the Catawba River. We've had otters out there, right? And I'm just worried about the damage to that piece of nature out there. I mean, I understand wanting to develop it and selling it, but I just don't want to see it overdeveloped and have all that lost right there in the middle of town.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe could you speak a little bit to like the watershed overlay and if there's some protections there or how that might
watershed
impact that?
Overlay in.
Or the flood zone
Turn on?
also,
No,
I don't know if that's an
yes.
issue as well.
So, okay, great question. Let's turn both of those layers back on so that I can make sure I'm speaking to the right section. So watershed, flood. I think there is only a very small minor section of the site that would be in the, where'd the watershed go? That would be in the flood damage prevention ordinance, so if anything. No, it's all on the other side. I think the difference for the flood damage prevention ordinance, again, we're talking about this parcel in here. I believe in the new updated flood maps that have not been yet advertised nor adopted by the state, this tiny little bit of flood area might come across the street a little bit, but that's what we would consider the 0.02% flood zone, which there are no restrictions for in that. There is that blue line stream that runs through there and subject to the watershed ordinance in the WS4 PA corridor overlay, which is the Lake Road S WS4 PA corridor overlay section of the watershed. You are limited to 24% development of 24% of the site with impervious area without introducing a stormwater control measure on the site. And then you are further restricted to not being able to go over 70% development of the entire site with impervious area. So things that are impervious area are your house, a paved street, a paved driveway. Gravel that is driven upon is actually considered an impervious area under state of North Carolina rules because it gets compacted so much that it is hard for the water to infiltrate there. But other natural areas, if there were areas with big river rockstone and things that you could go through there, so there would be for a total overall development, so let's just take this parcel here. If it's 20 acres, you couldn't develop more than 70% of that under the watershed ordinance as it sits today. And if you developed more than 24%, you'd have to put in specific stormwater control measures to make sure that the drainage was appropriately dealt with in that area, so.
What was your comment on the 100-foot?
There is a 100-foot buffer required from the edge of a blue line stream under the watershed ordinance.
And this is the blue line stream?
Yes.
It is the specific wording. I'm going to see if I can remember where that is in the ordinance. Do you guys pray for me here? There's a. Let's see if I can. Off the top of my head about buffer areas required. Yes, a minimum 100-foot vegetated buffer is required for all development activities that exceed the low density option. Otherwise, you have a minimum 30% buffer if it's low density. Presumably, development of this is going to be that high density. No new development is allowed in the buffer except for water-dependent structures and public-private projects such as road crossings, so if there did build a bridge or a greenway, and their appurtenances should minimize activity of direct water runoff, surface water, and maximize the utilization of stormwater best management practices. It does say desirable artificial stream bank or shoreline stabilization is permitted.
So it's protection
So-
on 100-foot on either side of the street?
Yes, there would be, if there were desirable artificial stream bank or shoreline stabilization requested, we would have to dig further, yes, and tongue twister, into what that is to whether or not that is desirable.
Such as at
Or
Bethel
not,
Park
or
would be
be
a good
required.
example.
So for example, if you needed to build a retaining wall to keep your development there, would that be suitable if you have this wall here to stabilize the land above it and below it? That's not to say you would have a house developed in that area, but would you need to stabilize the bank somehow in that area if you did remove vegetation from around it in other areas? That is a question that would depend entirely upon what was proposed as to what was required there. I do believe that if you wanted to put anything else, like say you did want to propose a house in there, you'd need to go to Board of Adjustment to exempt yourself from this particular requirement.
In part to her question, you know, we're protected basically around the stream for a 60-yard wide stretch.
200 feet.
66 yards, you know, two-thirds
Yes.
both for them.
Wendy, do building inspectors note buffer violations when they go on construction sites? Or is that something that only the code enforcement officer responds to?
So for this particular type of development that I would expect in here, there's going to need to be access to get to it, which means there's going to need to be some form of roadway or something developed, probably before there'll need to be roads, water, sewer, electric, and all of those kind of things put in beforehand. And then that would be our engineering department and you guys, if it was a subdivision of other lots that included those new roads, because a subdivision with new road has to come before you and then has to go to city council for that approval. And then it would need to be developed before we would sign off on a final plat to get that subdivided. So any of those kind of features that would come close to that area would be developed by us. And I'm saying this because I don't know if there might be a road at the edge of that 100-foot buffer versus if there might be part of a person's house or lot that was there. The next step then for developing the thing on the lot would be to get a zoning permit for that thing.
I'm
then-
assuming that this already has permits and has
But I
been
just
through
wanted
all
to
that.
explain it for the people here in
I'm
the
trying to
audience that might
understand
not
when
know
there's a
that.
violation, who flags it.
Okay, well, let me explain the process for these people, because it depends on where you're at in the process as to how you would get there. So we would not approve a zoning permit that would allow something to be built in that buffer. So that's where another layer of, I guess, review officers and who might catch what is being developed there. And then if they got the zoning permit for it, and then you go to the building permit, you need a building permit for the same place on the lot that is at the zoning permit. Ideally, they would not be close enough that you are worrying about it being too close in the buffer. But then at that next step, once it starts construction, yes, it would primarily be the building inspectors that would say, hey, you put this house in the place that you said you were gonna put it on the zoning permit and on your building plans. As always, though, the code enforcement officer would step in if there was a complaint from anyone, a neighbor, a concerned citizen that, hey, we think we've built something in there, then the code enforcement officer would come in to look at, are we too close to a boundary? We did have a situation recently where a neighbor, a year or so ago, where a neighbor was concerned about that. And both our building inspectors and our code enforcement officer went out to investigate, this was a question of whether the house was being built within the setback or not. And they both worked together on that along with the contractors and the surveyors for the lots, for those
Does that
pieces.
include tree removal and not just building footprint?
The
Tree
inspection,
removal inside the buffer
during
during construction.
construction, let me go back to that buffer area. It requires a buffer? I'm not 100% sure. I need to dig more into the watershed ordinance as to what is required in that buffer.
Well, doesn't the state require, because of the
You can't remove
disturbing
trees.
greater than an acre of land, you gotta come in with erosion control plan?
Yes, sir.
And I'll guarantee you, they hawk that like a, whatever.
So then, if you're in violation of your erosion and sediment control plan, that's something that DEQ would look at. And
But that's only for development of an acre or more.
Correct.
Which is, this is.
But any development on this site is probably like, I don't think somebody's gonna buy this site and just develop 1 acre. So
Yeah.
they're gonna develop the whole site and they'll need that erosion
Unless they
sediment
sell
control
lots.
plan to do that. Once you have, so if we go on down this pathway that everybody and everything has been developed, and Bob has his house here, and his house includes the portion of land that includes that 100-foot buffer. And he goes in there and starts cutting stuff down and putting gazebos and, accessory dwellings and all that kind of stuff in there illegally. That will be up to someone to report to the city, and
what I
the
wanted to
zoning
know.
and code enforcement officer would then go out and look at that. So again, there's all these, I guess, different triggers of where a violation could potentially occur and different people that may be responsible at those times for catching that. We do not hire the code enforcement officer or task him or her with driving around the city trying to find violations.
got that.
Just to be clear for everybody, and because a lot of these do occur in the rear of your yard, you can't see from the street. We're not allowed to go on your property without certain permissions of that. But we do respond quite quickly to any complaints that are filed and address those. So, yeah, great questions there. Yes. Any other comment?
Yeah, any other public comments or questions? You please, if you can just state your name and address and go for it.
Hi, my name's Donnie Palmgren, Palmgren. I live at 119 Dogwood Drive. And what I wanted to say is to kind of restate that what we really love about that neighborhood is that it's very wooded. All the houses currently around Dogwood and Smoke Drive, I think all of them have at least an acre of land around them or more. So there's a lot of woods and buffers around all of our houses. And I think it's fantastic that no road's going to join up with Dogwood and Smoke Rise. We appreciate that. And I'm glad that we've got that 30-foot buffer zone. But 30 feet is not much when 30 feet away there's an apartment complex. You know, I mean, suddenly you've changed the whole character of the neighborhood. When you know, here's your road, and then 30 feet on the other side of it, there's a big apartment complex right there. I would really appreciate keeping that low-density buffer in place there, so that way, that big plot of land could still be developed. And it needs to be, because I know we're having a housing crisis, we all know that. But it could be developed without changing the fundamental character of our street and our neighborhood. You know, we could still walk our dogs as we do every day up and down Smoke Rise, you know, and not have somebody's apartment building like right there. You know, it would be, because like I said, 30 feet is not that much when you've got that kind of density construction and residents just 30 feet away from you. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment.
That may I have a follow-up question, I guess, for Wendy? Have you calculated allowing for that 30-foot setback from the property line there all the way back to Smoke Rise, well, to wherever that goes, and the 100-foot setback from the creek? How wide an area is it that's actually
I have not.
buildable?
I will try to do that. Burke GIS.
Roughly?
I've not. Burke GIS is down today, so I would like to bring it up to be able to show you the exact measurements here. But I will bring it up to show a couple of different options there. So if we look here,
You can
the
actually
average
measure.
distance looks like it is,
Oh, yeah.
let's move this one here.
Okay, yeah, good.
It looks like
Oh.
to the creek from Smoke Rise is about 545 feet. So if you had 130 feet off of that, you've got about 400 feet wide there to be able to develop lots in that area. At 10 dwelling units per acre, if you did, I'm gonna get this wrong. In the math, I tell you guys, it's been a long week.
My
I was
point,
just trying to figure out how much, again, how many density that was, how many acres you would need to get a lot of development there.
my point is just that, a very large portion of this 20 acres is not developable at all.
Correct.
And B, whatever is there, there still has to be access, so you've got to have a road, which is going to take up another, which would have to be a minimum width of
40
40
feet wide.
feet, taking up another chunk of that space.
So if we took
you're
40 feet off of each
seriously
side of
limited.
that, because you would be looking at, well, you'd take another 60 feet off to develop, you'd have
350.
350. Would you want an apartment complex to stretch there, or would you want something more like townhomes to be there? Again, one large building, I'm gonna say would be much more difficult to construct on that slope than individual homes or a connected set of townhomes from structural building design reasons. You don't typically have, I mean, you might have some large hotels somewhere hanging off the side of a mountain, but from a practical developer getting a return on your money standpoint,
Morganton, yeah.
it's more likely to have individual homes or townhomes I would think, in that location than it would be to have, apartments.
large apartment
The other
building,
factor in developing apartments is that you need one owner to retain ownership of that and being willing to own it and to rent it over time and to manage it, which is sometimes a burden on an owner or developer versus being able to sell it to individual owners, which you can do with, the streets will become the cities if it was developed with streets. But then you could sell it to individual owners, ABC, both with townhomes and with single-family lots. And then the individual management of those pieces and those homes goes to individuals, like development along Dogwood, et cetera, versus having an apartment. I guess what I'm saying is, I think it's probably unlikely you get a large apartment block there. Whether that looks very different to townhomes or to individual smaller lot homes, I take Mr. Palmgren's point that development there, I think, is probably what we're talking about rather than the apartments. But I do think having a structurally and then economic developmentally, I'm looking at Rick here who does more development than Eric, that probably seems to be the less likely options in there.
That looks like the open space percentage.
Yeah. that's
It
what I was
could
gonna
be
say
the
with
open
Judy's
space
comment,
percentage
combining
there.
them and making it open space.
Again, but that is why we list the possible uses for you.
Right, right.
The possible developments and talk through these size, because again, once it is that person's, I suppose if they really wanted to go build a Chick-fil-A in the middle of it, they could, but I do need to let you know that if a compliant application comes in, I cannot refuse it. If there was a non-compliant application come in, depending upon what they're asking for, it would either go to Board of Adjustment if there was some sort of variance, while not being able to vary the things in the deed. It would have to go to them, and they'd have to prove a hardship to get that variance. If it was an alternative design measure, it would come back before you for a recommendation to City Council as to whether or not that's something, their alternative, and they would have to have an alternative, not just an, I don't want to do it, to whether or not that would be suitable. And those would all be public meetings in which all of the neighboring surrounding people would be back invited to and be able to comment then on more specific designs for that development of those.
Is the contour map readily available?
Yes, it is online. That mapping system I'm using is the City of Morganton zoning website. So if you zoom to the property and then you go to the little button at the top that looks like a stack of books is the layers, and the elevation contours are, you click the little eye. If the eye is visible, you can see them. If the eye is not visible, they go away. So it looks like this is a more detailed contour map because I'm zoomed in.
Are those 2 foot?
2 foot?
No, those are,
yeah, those are.
no, those are 2 foot,
Those are
yes.
2 foot.
Those are 2 foot, whereas
Yeah.
before we were looking at
The 10
5 or 10 foot
Yeah.
contours. So
No,
It's pretty steep.
it's fairly
Yeah, it
steep.
is.
However, I do note that
it is on Dogwood.
Dogwood is just as steep on there, and we have lots of lovely people here tonight that are from Dogwood, that their lots are as steep and have those houses there. But it may give you an indication of what's suitable. Now, are you able to I think it would be remiss to not mention that they would be able to grade and to change contours with erosion and proper erosion and sediment control, proper stabilization, proper retaining wall, whatever would be needed for that. Even if anybody's been past the new urgent care on Berkmont or the Dunkin' Donuts there's retaining walls as those are kind of benched along for those. So
Doing dirt's expensive.
moving dirt is expensive, yes, sir,
And
of those.
not to throw in doubt, but I've been fiddling with the GIS while we were talking here, and it looks to me like there's nowhere near 500 feet between Smoke
I
Rise
don't
and
know. I mean, that was Google Maps I was trying to measure on. I
I'm
think,
coming
here's
up
a
with-
measuring tool here.
I'm coming up with 300 feet.
Okay. Here's a measuring tool on ours that I've just done, because again, I don't usually use that. I was going on the low point. So yeah, that looks more like 300 feet. You're correct, Louis.
Which means.
I don't actually have the Blue
even
Line
narrower.
Creek on
You
this one.
actually have only a very narrow developable path through there.
Great catch.
Just pointing that out, that it can't be too much.
Yes.
The density restrictions, they pertain to the entire parcel, not to the buildable portions of the parcel, correct?
But that's why you gotta recombine them.
So if, so they pertain to the entire portions, I would say that I don't have an exclusion for what is buildable or not. But it would be overall. So for example, someone could take a large parcel and cluster development in a section of it, in a flat section of it, and then leave the other portions of that. Yes, so they, that is an option to put, and any, well, I don't want to say any developer, because you always have people that might do crazy things, but any developer that wants a good return on their money is going to develop the more developable parts. And in fact, I would go so far as to say, that's probably why this parcel of 70-some acres, when you look at all the different parcels there, 70, 80, 100 acres, when you look at all the parcels not just owned by Mr. Norman, but owned by the other surrounding property owners that are undeveloped, because we developed the good land in Morganton first, and now this is what's left. Places with creeks, places with hills on them are what's left. City property that we own, and other places is not developed because they've got creeks and steep slopes on it. So people go for the better flat land first, and then,
Easy stuff.
and now we're getting to where there are very few of those types of parcels left in Morganton, but we do have, opportunities with, these types of parcels, though they are trickier to develop and would not get the same yield that a flat parcel of this would. Yes. Thank you for that, Louis. I did not know that there was a measuring tool on this one. But now everybody else does too. You can go play around with it on all those pieces.
If you have another one more comment, do you mind just coming up to the podium to share your question or comment? If you could just state your name and address. Thank you.
My name is Mark Carlisle, and I live at 118 Dogwood. And I've only been there for, since June, but like Donnie and Judy has mentioned, the nature, the beautiful area, and it's the other thing. So what worries me is if we change the zoning so that it allows a whole different type of businesses, and if we're doing it for marketing purposes so that the property can be sold to a larger development, it opens up, when I looked, the lady that I talked to this week showed me the chart of the types of businesses between the two zonings. And it opens up a lot of types of businesses that would be, besides the congestion and the traffic and all of that, but it would, the noise as well. I mean, an outdoor event venue or a microbrewery or all of this type of thing. I guess what worries me is changing that zoning. It's wild, wild west. We're opening it to, we don't know what we're opening it to. I'll be a lot more comfortable when I can find out what we're doing. But I believe you mentioned that once we change the zoning, when they come in and say, hey, we're gonna put a school or whatever. Now, to your point, flattening the whole zoning thing and dropping a school down there may not make sense. But a Chick-fil-A or whatever. So I'm just hoping we can preserve that, and I just appreciate what y'all doing for us.
Thank you.
There is I'm glad you mentioned that table of permitted uses again, because, Chad, if you can bring up my screen, and I will show the table of permitted uses. For a lot of these uses, over here on the far right side of the screen, there are these other sections of the zoning ordinance that provide limitations on those uses. If we look at the office and service uses 344, retail, wholesale, again, just to be clear here, on retail, would have to be less than 3,000 square foot building, inside fully enclosed, but would also have to look at 345, 346, and 347 for a lot of these. And if I could just point you to some of those requirements. The first one being that they need to have direct access from streets that meet commercial standards and major or minor arterials. The same with 346 for recreation venues, major or minor arterials, and the Dogwood, for example, would be a residential street. Beinarden may classify as a collector street, would be potentially a stretch. I would say Kirksey is definitely a major arterial. So if you were to have that type of use, you would have to build either, and none of these actually are coming up as collector streets. So a collector street would have to be at least 60 to 100 feet wide. A major or minor arterial is going to look like Kirksey Drive. So to have one of those uses off of that street, they would need to build another street that looks, we'll say, at least like Union Street, through the property to be able to access off of it. So while I'm not saying it could not happen, a developer would have to put a heck of a lot of money and a heck of a lot of engineering into that type of street on those types of contours to make a lot of those other uses viable. So again, I want to be clear to the people on the board that that is an option if they come to us to meet these requirements of the zoning ordinance. But that is probably something that I should have pointed out earlier, so I'm super glad that you triggered me to remind people of those standards. That if we're talking about a 40-foot wide residential street with curb and gutter and a couple of sidewalks, it looks very different to what a commercial standard street to be a minor arterial would need to look like. So again, can happen, depends on what the developer or whomever is willing to put in. But if you did put a street in at that width, you're going to need, first of all, you're going to need to get land from Burke County to come out onto Kirksey Drive with that overlay there. And then you're going to need to, again, if we're showing that little segment there, you'd need to come out here and do some other major work there. But then you'd be able to do different stuff, but you might compromise your amount of overall development that you could get and the financial realities of being able to build it to be able to come off of that kind of street. So essentially you'd end up with, instead of residential type streets connecting over to Union, you'd end up with a larger street through there to connect to both of those, all of which DOT would also have to agree to because they're connecting those two things. So as the gentleman pointed out, I want to be clear, these are all options that could happen. What we need to assess is the likelihood, I guess, of those happening and given those restrictions. And that's why those restrictions are in the zoning ordinance, is because we don't want a lot of those noisy activities off of quieter residential type streets in there. But again, options, if somebody's willing to put the money in.
You doing one more? Yeah, please, of course, or as many more as we have. If you can just say your name and address, please.
Maureen Austin. I live at 126 Dogwood Drive. I am the person who this affects immediately. My land is right next door to the forest. I agree with everything they've said. I'm not going to repeat it. I will say, if you're going to take a look at this land, I think you should go walk it. It is an interesting property. It's about flat and then it goes boom. And it's like a trough for water from all different sides. I was very happy to hear that Dogwood would not be opened up into the new property. I will say I want to thank you for letting me talk because I did not call Jackie to let her know I was going to, but I want to say this has been a master class in planning. I've listened to you, and a lot goes into it, and I understand that. But I really wish you would put on your wellies and take a walk on that property before you consider rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you.
So from here, we can take, any more questions or anything for the board. Also noting that whatever decision you make tonight is a recommendation that goes to city council for the final decision on whether or not it is rezoned. And if whatever your recommendation is, we'll go to that next meeting, and all of the individuals here are also welcome to come to that city council meeting and make representation and comments at that meeting, as the applicant will be invited, and as well as anyone on this board, should you wish to do so, noting that your recommendation for, against, numbers of voting, et cetera, will be captured in the council report that will be presented at that meeting. Essentially kind of having this meeting over again, but maybe in less detail if you guys have a recommended motion or reasons or details for that, so.
I guess before I get to that, is there any additional public comments? Anyone else, questions, concerns? Okay, so I'm gonna close the public comment section, and then any more discussion on the commission?
Any questions?
Great.
I will speak as a developer. I know y'all have concerns out there, but in my view, if I'm looking at the property as a developer, I'm not necessarily looking to max out the density on that particular spot. I'm looking at the whole thing in a whole, and I would want all the property to be zoned the same. I mean, if I were a developer looking at that particular property, that's what I would be looking at. I don't think, that piece of property on the whole deal is not it's not a deal breaker, but it would be more consistent to have it all zoned one thing. And then you take away the mobile homes, and so that's a plus. So, that's my thought. You could maybe even, somebody might want to, since it's a separate property, somebody might want to develop the other property, make a road into that, and then put mobile homes in it. I mean, you got to look at, when you're looking at just possibilities, it could be any different possibilities. But I see your thinking where, hey, this is open, nice open area. I'd rather it stay wilderness, but, chances are that's not going to happen. And that's just my 2 cents worth.
Whether it's rezoned or not.
Yeah, whether it's rezoned or not.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so the next thing, I'm gonna read the proposed motion, and then we'll have a vote.
Well, we need
Well, no,
somebody
somebody needs to
make
make
a
a
So
motion.
sorry.
That's okay.
I'll be happy to do that.
Thanks, sir.
Recommend to the city council support of the proposed rezone of Ola Street, with that a PIN number, shown on the Imagine 2040 Comprehensive Plan future land use map as mixed-use residential land, and it be zoned from low-intensity district with AHS and AP overlays to rezone it to a zone medium-intensity district with the AHS and the WP overlays. And the proposal considered reasonable for the following reasons. The development of the site with mixed-density residential uses fulfills the original expectations of the image or Imagine 2040 Comprehensive Land Use Plan for this site. The additional density available in MID, should the site be developed with housing, could fulfill a significant community need shortage. Preserving the AHS and WP overlays will ensure suitable development is environmentally friendly to the water system and does not obstruct the airspace for Foothills Regional Airport. Utility and traffic impacts from future development can be managed at the time of development in the form of a motion.
I'll second.
Got a second?
Okay. And then we'll put it to a vote. Everyone in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? One opposed? So it passes? Passes. Great. Okay. So then,
That would go to city council
City
at the
council on the
March 3rd.
March 3rd meeting at 6 PM in this room.
I would have been very happy to have voted for this if this parcel had been recombined with the other one. So we could have been assured that development rights on this property could have moved to other more suitable developable areas. But as it is now, there's by right quantity allowed on that property that would impinge on some land that probably shouldn't be developed.
that's fair.
We'll put that to the applicant.
Great. And then, next we have, are there any other items for discussion this evening?
No, no. None.
Okay, then I will adjourn the meeting. So adjourned.